Hello, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well here, Aubrey. How are you doing today?
I am great to spend a lot
Good.
of good family time, which
Yes.
that
Yeah.
brings up the question that I have for you today,
Okay.
because this often happens more, I think, when you're with family and close friends where people know you
Yes.
well. What
Yes.
is the last pointed question you were asked?
Oh, yes. On Thanksgiving, we were playing a family game. The game is called Vertellus, where we go around. It's very simple. Someone asks you a question, usually about your relationship to them. So it's between
Okay.
you and this person. And my stepbrother in law, his question to ask me was, what is a value that we don't share?
Oh, that is a very pointed question.
Yes, and I was honest, and it wasn't. I think maybe it came off in a way that he was maybe a little bit confused or maybe a little hurt,
Ooh,
unfortunately. But I think it's okay. But it was a very pointed question. Aubrey, what about
yes.
you? Have you
We
been
played
asked?
a similar game on Thanksgiving, actually. It's called Scruples,
Hmm.
where this is an interesting word, scruples. It's sort of like some people might see something as inappropriate that you don't. Like,
Uh huh.
some people might have scruples. This is a little bit of an
Ah.
outdated word. It's actually an outdated game. I think it's from like the
Oh
1970s,
my gosh.
but it's still fun. I love it. Some of the questions we have to remove because they're very inappropriate. We're like, wow, this does not fly anymore.
Oh
But
no.
some of them are still interesting. And someone asked me if I were sitting in a parked car and someone parked next to me and opened their door into my car. We
Ah.
call that being doored, like someone doored my
Yeah.
car
Yeah.
or dinged, we might say, and it like
Mm-hmm.
either dented it or removed the paint. Would you get out right away and say something? And
Right.
I had difficulty answering because I'm not
You're
confrontational.
non-confrontational.
And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
I guess it would depend on how hard they hit it. I don't know. It's tricky. What would you do, Lindsay? I'm curious
Ooh.
about your answer.
I think if I made eye contact with him, I would have to, and if it were a really strong one, I'd have to get out, but if it were just something small, I might just be like, "Oh, it could happen to anyone."
Sorry,
It's
not
just a
gonna get it
mistake, a tiny
fixed.
thing. I'm not even gonna bother to go get the body repainted. It's
Right.
just a tiny ding. Happens all the time when I'm not in the car, so
Yeah, it's tricky because even if you do say something, you're probably not going to get it fixed, insist they get it fixed because it's so small. So, do you say
yeah,
something?
it's
So,
a good
these
point.
are really good examples of pointed questions.
Yes.
This came up in a recent episode, 2323. Lindsay, you said you started asking pointed questions when you were about 9 about like Santa Claus and the holidays.
Right.
And I was immediately like, ooh, this is great vocabulary, pointed questions. So we're going to cover
Yes.
that and a few related terms.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this. We're getting into something that is very high level, C1 level, where we kind of
Yes.
show the difference between pointed questions and direct questions, very specific vocabulary. But Aubrey, first, I want to remind our listeners if they love vocab, where should they be listening to this show?
Yes, definitely in the app, right? This is where this pointed questions was really highlighted for me when I was pulling keywords for the app because you
Mm-hmm.
can listen along with the transcripts and we highlight really impressive vocabulary like this that you can just click and add to your vocab list, study it, remove it once you have it updated. It's the best, fastest way to learn vocabulary. So you
A
can go to
100%.
allearsenglish.com/app,
Yes.
APP to download it.
Yep, you got it. 7-day free trial. Check it out. You'll have the chance to see the transcripts, tap on keywords, save them to your list, and you can decide if you want to continue on as a premium member. All right.
Yes, awesome. Check it
Okay.
out.
All right, Aubrey, let's get into pointed question. I think our listeners are ready to learn a bit more about what this means.
Yes. So this is a chunk. If you look up in the dictionary, you're going to see a different definition for just pointed, the adjective, which we'll cover in a minute, and then pointed question
Hmm.
together. So this is a sharply directed question. So this means you're like intentionally asking a specific person. It's not like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm just asking anyone.
Right.
And the other person would find it difficult to answer or maybe be embarrassed by the answer. So this is
Yeah.
a very specific type of question.
Yeah. So, sample sentence here. She asked me a pointed question about my future plans. Okay.
Yeah, so that might mean
Mhm.
it implies some kind of criticism. I could imagine my mother asking me pointed questions as a college student about my future plans, right? There's definitely intention behind the question.
Oh, for sure. Trying to say something behind the question, right? What
Right.
else, Aubrey? Is there another sample sentence?
Yeah, you could say it was a very pointed question and I didn't know how to answer. So this might be if you're telling a story about someone that asked you a very pointed question. And this
Mm-hmm.
might, you're like, I didn't even know what to say. Cause often that's the case with pointed questions, like the one your brother-in-law asked you. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
ooh, what do I say? How honest can I
Yeah.
be? Is this going to
Yes.
hurt feelings?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Really intense. But then we also have direct questions. And I wonder what is the difference between pointed questions and direct questions, Aubrey?
Yeah, and I'm guessing I kind of had to look into this a little bit because I think the average native speaker, if you asked, they would have to think about it and they might even have to look in the dictionary, right? So
Yeah.
direct questions are much more general. This is just a clear and specific question that requires a straightforward response. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you ask someone, what is your name? What is your occupation? That's a direct question, right? It has a
Right.
very clear, straightforward, expected response, but there's not necessarily that underlying, that it would be difficult to answer or you might be embarrassed by the answer. So, not necessarily pointed.
Yeah, I think the umbrella term could be direct questions. And
Mhm.
because a pointed question is also kind of a direct question, it's just a direct question about something that's a bit more intense or more personal or more
Good
intentional,
point. Yeah. So,
right?
we could say some direct questions are pointed, right?
Right. And
But
others are more neutral, right?
exactly, right? Not
Mhm.
all direct questions are pointed questions, but all pointed questions are direct questions.
Correct. Yes. Love that. Okay. We've got the hierarchy here now.
Yes.
So, where do we go from here?
So we have a couple examples. You might say, I asked you a direct question. Can you please give me a straight answer? So I have
Mhm.
heard this before, especially on like TV. You'll see this if,
Mm.
people are trying to argue, but kind of politely, and you've asked someone something and they're beating around the bush. They're not being direct with their answer. And this also with like the law in a court case, if someone is
Mhm.
not answering directly, an attorney might say this, like, you've been asked a direct question. We
Mhm.
expect a clear, direct answer.
Yeah, or the judge, right? The judge
Yes.
could find a way. I'm not sure what terminology they use there, but yes.
They're not going to let
Sometimes
people evade, right? And sort of give a half
exactly.
answer or not be clear.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I could say this to all the politicians on TV. Could you please give
Right.
me a straight answer?
Yes, debate, and it becomes word salad. You're like,
Yes,
I don't even remember what the
eh,
question was. That
right,
was
and
not
nothing
a
means
direct.
anything. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
That's a good example. And then another sample, that date was strange. She kept asking me rapid fire direct questions. I mean, some people just have this personality.
Absolutely. But it would feel, especially if you're not used to it, it might feel
Mhm.
strange if they're asking
Yeah.
direct question after direct question and it's not much of a back and forth. And then this adjective rapid fire is interesting. It means, unhesitating, rapid, one after another, especially in dialogue, right?
Mm.
When instead of like taking time to have a back and forth about something, you just ask another question right away.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if our listeners are listening to other podcasts, they might hear they have like a fire round of questions. A lot of shows will do that kind of thing where they just fire 6 or 7 questions at you and you're just supposed to answer quickly. They'll do that
Right.
with guests, right? Mhm.
Exactly. Yes.
Mhm. That's where that comes from, rapid fire. Love that. Before we go into number 3, I feel like I have to call out how cultural this is.
Oh, yes.
How direct questions are. It's personality, yes, it could be gender, it could be upbringing, but it's also very cultural.
Yes, I agree, very much so, right? Some of us are much more direct, even within the United States. I have met people who are much more
Mhm.
direct than others, people who are more likely to ask pointed questions than others. So even within a culture, very much, personality. But I agree. I think there are different cultures there where this wouldn't be valid, or people would try to avoid asking direct questions.
Mhm. I mean, you could argue that on the East Coast, the big cities on the East Coast, you're more likely to get a direct question than other parts of the country, right? Within the
Yes,
US. Mhm.
definitely, right?
For
Someone
sure.
might be really vague and, I
Yeah.
use that idiom beating around the bush. It means you're
Yeah.
kind of like in a roundabout way getting to the question you want to ask.
Exactly. All right. So number 3, let's just take a look at the word pointed as an adjective. So we're going to pull this one out. Yeah. What do we want to
Yes,
know here?
and this usually is referring to statements, remarks,
Yeah.
or looks. A look
Mm-hmm.
can be pointed, and this means
Oh.
expressing criticism in a direct, unambiguous way. So it means it's very clear that there's some kind of criticism intended, and anything can be pointed, right? Well, I mean, it's usually like remarks or looks, but it can be like an article or a book, like that's statements. It's these where there's criticism intended.
Got it. So maybe as you said, a documentary where it's highlighting
Absolutely.
some kind of a scandal that happened or a phenomenon or something that we should be concerned about in
Right, you
society.
might maybe a book, you could say this book is a pointed look at prison life, and that would
Ah,
definitely imply that it's criticizing the prison system.
yeah, and it's directly highlighting the issues. It's not
Right.
couching anything. It's not adding humor, right? I think about Orange is the New Black. That probably wouldn't be as pointed because it is sending a strong message about our prison system, but it's actually also a very funny show and good acting and dramatic and good writing. So maybe
Really
that's
good
not
point.
quite as
So
funny.
maybe you
Yeah.
wouldn't say, like, "This is a pointed discussion about prison life," right? No, it's actually a comedy dramedy, right?
Yeah.
A little
And a good
different.
one I would recommend to check
Yes.
out on Netflix. Yeah, it's great. Okay, what else, Aubrey? Let's see. She made pointed remarks about the need for strict gun laws. Yes,
Yeah, I feel like we
direct
hear this
there.
a lot with political conversations on on the news, because that's where we're trying to be more straightforward about the facts. And so if something is an opinion, right,
Mhm.
where there's something where their opinion is clearly pointed, that
Yeah.
means there's underlying criticism.
Yes. Okay, Aubrey, what comes next here? Should we ask pointed questions? What do you
Yeah, I think
think? I
that's a
mean,
good question to think about, right? If you're having a conversation with someone, should you be asking pointed questions? For both of us on Thanksgiving, this was an interesting activity for friends, and it made the conversation really robust and interesting for me. I loved it.
yeah.
But you definitely have to think about the relationship, right? What is
Yeah.
appropriate? You don't necessarily want to create awkward situations or hurt connections.
Yeah.
So, when asking pointed questions, I think there's a lot to think about before you do.
Yeah, these games are kind of interesting because they're allowing us an outlet, a container, a way to ask these questions that I think most people would never ask those questions. But
Exactly.
maybe they want to know the answers. They don't know, but they maybe don't know how to articulate the question, or more likely are too afraid to ask it because there's a real losing face going on. And deeper than
Absolutely.
just losing face, it's
Like, your
potential.
brother-in-law never would ask you that, but it's like,
No
"I pulled
way.
this card, I have to ask it." It kind of forces
Exactly.
us to have these interesting conversations.
Exactly. And I feel like this could maybe be our poll question today. And this could also be a glimpse into cultural differences for our listeners, right? Across the
Yes.
world. Should you ask pointed questions, yes or no? Um,
Yes. I love
mhm.
that. Come to Spotify and answer the poll question. Whether you listen on Spotify or not, you can come answer our poll. We love to see the results there.
Of course. All right, Aubrey, role play time. We are college age and we are also sisters. So,
Yes, it's a little different.
okay.
We are not ourselves here.
Okay, got it, got it. I have to have a certain accent here or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a pretty direct question.
Uh-oh. I'm ready. Go for it.
Have you called mom recently?
Oh, wow. I feel like that's a really pointed question. Did she say something?
No, I was just wondering.
Oh, okay. I haven't called her in a while. Last time we chatted, she made some very pointed remarks about my dating life.
Mm. Yeah, I actually had a similar exchange with my brother because I was under the impression that my he wasn't inviting my parents for Thanksgiving because I
Oh,
called my dad and he's like, "Oh, we have no plans for Thanksgiving." And I was like, "Oh, that's not okay." So I texted him. I said, "Dad says he doesn't have any Thanksgiving plans. Why not?" In big letters.
that's a very pointed question, Lindsay.
And he said, "Oh, no, it's okay. We just made the plans." So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay, gotcha. We're
sometimes I
just
think
procrastinating.
yeah, I think, Aubrey, as we get older, sometimes with our siblings, especially as our parents get older, there comes a time for real direct questions to our siblings, right?
Absolutely. It's true,
Mhm.
right? Because if he's like,
Mhm.
"No, we're not inviting him," be like, no, that's not
That's
okay."
not okay. I was
No.
ready to get on the phone and have a few
I
pointed
flew
words.
here. He will be
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's go through the role play.
Yeah. So first you used a direct question. You said, "Well, I'm going to ask you a direct question. You're preparing me here for a pretty serious question," right? So lots
Mhm.
of questions are direct, but we often will say this to let someone know, like, I'm starting a conversation that might be a little uncomfortable.
Exactly, and then I said, "Oh, wow, I feel like that's a really pointed question." Yeah, so again,
Yes. So this is where,
mm,
you've said, "Have you called mom recently?" And
yeah,
then I'm calling it for what it is, right? That there's underlining criticism. Like, I
yeah,
feel like you're criticizing, like, you already know that I haven't, and you're
yeah.
criticizing me.
Exactly, and obviously there's a little something more to maybe they have a strained relationship with their mom or something.
Yeah,
There's something
could be.
here as to why that's a pointed question, because if everything's okay and they're in contact regularly, it wouldn't really be a pointed question, right?
Exactly. There's
Yeah.
got to be say like if you haven't talked to your mom in a year, you're going to
Mhm.
assume they know that. And that's why I said, "Oh, that sounds like a pointed question. Did she say something?" And I'm like,
Exactly.
"Clearly you have information here that you're
Yeah,
upset about."
exactly. And then what did you say, Aubrey, at the end?
Yeah, and I said, "Well, last time we chatted, she made some very pointed remarks about my dating life." So this is just that adjective pointed, not pointed questions. Here she's made some pointed statements, which would
Mhm.
imply criticism.
Right, and kind of explaining why you haven't really gotten back in touch lately,
Right.
right?
A little
Yes.
space.
Little space. Interesting. All right. I mean, this is really good stuff. This is about human connection right here. Aubrey, where should we leave our listeners today?
Yeah. So, of course, be careful with pointed questions. They can imply criticism, they could hurt a connection. So, we do want to think about the relationship and what it is we're talking about, right? But
Mhm.
really good vocab. And I think really interesting to think about the difference between pointed questions and direct questions.
Yeah, and ask yourself that. This will be our poll. So definitely go and participate in our Spotify poll, everyone. Should you ask a pointed question in your culture? We're making that purposefully very broad. And I know
Yes.
we're not trying to make sweeping generalizations, but think about it quick and answer it on the spot, split second. What is your response to that? Right.
Yeah.
And we'll see what the results are.
Awesome. Very interesting. Thank you, Lindsay. This was
Yes.
a fun conversation.
All right. Good stuff. Aubrey, you take care. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye.